Retro Hangover, supported via Patreon by listeners like you. We'd especially like to thank patrons Lyle, McKarns, Ashton, Ruby, Randall, Quiggle, Tony G, Studstill Smash, the Milkman, Katie, Quigg, Paul, Romalho, Raging Demon, JC, Meagan, Caruso, MaskedKeaton, Andrew Liguori, Ozzy Garcia, the Retro Vixen, Adam from The Good, the Bad, the Backlog, Thunderdome Gaming Society, Dischimera, Jenny E, Rick Firestone, ParallaxPuddles, Soha, Keith, Gasper, Dave Jackson, Eric Gess, Kayla Jackson, Nomad from the Retro Wildlands Podcast, Ash Yvette, Alan Bingham, and Storm Beagle. Your continued engagement and generous donations are deeply appreciated.
Open your ears and crack some beers. You are listening to the most recent episode of Retro Hangover.
Hello, retro and classic gamers. Welcome to the podcast where we group goofy groupers gagging gas gently generally. This is Retro Hangover. I am your co-host, Chris Copleen, with, as always, your host, Shane. Done goofed Dick
Now the only thing I can think of is just like a big penis with like a goofy face on it, and that's horrifying.
Why would you do that?
Why? What do you mean? Why would I do that? You're the one with the goof dick dragon thing.
It's done goofed. It's a goofy dick.
Yeah, exactly. That's my point.
I guess it would be a goofy dick.
I say, you know, there has to be some really weird esoteric community out there, some dark web Etsy shit of like a goofy dildo or something. That has to be a thing.
Oh my God. I want it with sound effects. So like there's a button at the end, so it's about to go in, it just goes, yup.
Or no. It's like it's somehow aware of that, and so like when it penetrates, it just does that sound like it's falling down a cave.
That's a deep hole you got there.
God. All right, we've already ruined this episode.
Will Goofy die really quick in there like he does in Kingdom Hearts?
Oh, too soon.
Or is that Donald? Which one dies all the time? It's Donald, isn't it?
Well, okay. Well, I mean, I don't know what you're talking about, but like all the time. I mean, there's a scene in Kingdom Hearts where Goofy just straight up dies, or it's implied that he dies. He doesn't, of course, actually die, but there is that.
So it's kind of like you shove the dildo in and it's like all active and then just peters out.
I don't know. I mean, maybe it's like a Mr. Hands scenario. I don't know.
Yeah. We're putting way too much thought into this creative process. I think
we really are. You know, I'm just wondering, like anybody who happens to come across the show and sees this episode and they're like, oh, I would love a really great take on this family friendly game, Goof Troop, for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. And these fine gentlemen have provided this episode in which they will discuss this. And we'll definitely not bring up weird dildo things in the first like 5 minutes.
Well, obviously you missed the fact that it said explicit. But welcome.
Yeah.
We hope your children are having a good time in the back seat.
Oh, man.
Where you made them. But not with the dildo, unfortunately. Well, maybe. I mean, nowadays people are getting creative with what they can put in those things.
I mean, I don't know. We have the technology.
We do. Could you imagine like a goofy dildo popsicle inseminator?
Oh my God. That's like taking Disney adults to like a whole new level. They're just like, yeah, that's right, Billy. Your mommy was inseminated by a goofy. Ashton's probably listening to this while editing, and he's just like, dude, guys, what the fuck? Anyway, Goof Troop, am I right?
I'm dead. This is how it ties into Resident Evil. Fuck. Anyway. Well, I was already going to hell. I'm just trying to seal the deal. All right. So our game of the day is indeed Goof Troop. We are going to inseminate your ears with what games that we have been playing lately, as we are wont to do. Shane, how about you baste their glorious ear holes with some goodness about the game you've been playing lately?
Yeah, sure. So let's see. What have I been playing lately? Well, I did come across this little gem of an early access game called Halls of Torment. I believe I posted it in our the Rowdy Randall Shill Shack channel in our Discord. But yeah, I really like this game. It's basically a Vampire Survivor clone, but it is purposefully sort of aping the isometric Diablo 1 aesthetic and doing it really, really well. Like, it looks like if you were to turn Diablo 1 into a Vampire Survivors game, this is basically that game. And so of course that it's like this was tailor made for me. So yeah, so I've been putting some time into it. I think, what do I got, like 6 hours of playtime according to Steam, and I'm having a lot of fun with it. Like, as you get further in the levels and unlock achievements, you also unlock new characters to play as well as additional interactable either NPCs or buildings / like monuments in the sort of town area that you start in all the time. It's loosely a town. It's more like it's very reminiscent of like the Diablo 2 loading screen, actually, because all of your characters are standing around a campfire in much the same way. Like I said, you unlock new stuff. You can talk to, eventually you unlock an NPC that allows you to carry over items that you find in your runs, because in addition to like leveling up and gaining new skills from like a selection of, I think, 3, just like you do in Vampire Survivors and other games like that, you can also find gear that you can equip, and you get that from treasure chests that you get off of bosses. You eventually unlock this NPC by rescuing him from the level. He's trapped in a cage, and when you rescue him, he will stay up in your town, and I think they call him the well keeper. And so he stands next to this well that basically connects down through the levels of the dungeon that you're playing through. And so every run that you do, you're allowed to keep one of the gear pieces that you find during that run by going back to where the well is located on that level and essentially sending the item back up in the bucket up the well to this guy. Now, the trade-off there is that you no longer have that item for the rest of your run, but it is now available for you to purchase from him when you get back to town after your run's over. And once you purchase it, it's unlocked for all of your characters forever after that. And you can create gear loadouts based on the items that you've found and unlocked that you can start runs with. So that's another way of sort of like building your power over time for your characters, is finding all these different items that give you different boosts, and then figuring out like your optimal like gear loadouts for the different characters, and then doing runs with them. So they're still working on it. Like I said, it's early access, so they're adding more stuff all the time. But even what they have so far right now, I really like. I think it's like $5, so not a big ask. So if you're interested in that style of game, and or you like that old school like isometric RPG sort of aesthetic, I would definitely give this a look. Halls of Torment. It's pretty cool. But I think that's the biggest thing that's been taking up most of my time, other than things that we're playing for the show. But what about you, Chris? What have you been doing lately?
I played through all of Lufia 2, and yeah, it's a good game. It's a good game. I think it's one of those games that, how do I put it? You know those games that you get a lot of hype about and then you play through and then you don't quite understand the hype?
Yeah.
I'm kind of there with Lufia too. It's not that I dislike it. I really like it. I think it's a really solid game. I just don't see what everyone else sees in it, if that makes sense, or at least like the people who love it, what they see in it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a really good game. I think it's solid. There are some plot points I didn't think really matured where I thought they were going to go. But I can see what it was like when people played Lufia 2 back in the day and what they loved about it. Because here's a game that really takes a lot of classic JRPG gameplay and turn-based combat. Combat has your generalities and how you attack with some wrinkles here and there. But then there's a lot of puzzles, and those puzzles, if you like puzzles in your games, like brain teasers, more along the lines of Zelda, but actually a little bit more complicated and not as annoying, well, in order to get to them, then like Lufia 2 might be your jam. It has a lot of cool things. The thing is I don't have a lot of patience for puzzles in my games. So it took me a while to get over that. Thankfully, in my case,
is that foreshadowing our discussion of the game today by any chance?
I have different things to say about our game today. And,
okay.
Yeah, we'll definitely get to that. But when it comes to Lufia 2 in particular, it does shift away from the puzzles and starts getting more to your traditional JRPG combat later in the game. And that's where I think it separates itself. And that's where I really do like it. And I think it does do some things in terms of its narrative that I really do appreciate. Again, there are some things I thought were going to happen that didn't happen, that if they did happen, I think would be cooler. I know I'm being extremely vague here. I don't want to spoil anything, but overall, yeah, I had a really good time with it. And I kind of look at it and from the perspective for the reason I'm playing it, which I don't want to really talk about at the moment. And I can say, yeah, like this is like a really good RPG of that time. And I don't know. I'm going to do a rapid fire review. I'm going to be more in detail with that. I'm also going to be doing a long form review with Adam from The Good, the Bad, and the Backlog. So keep an ear out for that over on his channel. But yeah, Lufia got through it overall pleasantly. I wouldn't say surprised because I was expecting it to be good. Not as good as I thought it was going to be, but I am overall happy with it. I can say I enjoyed my time there.
Nice. Oh, and also just real quick, because I don't know why I just glossed over this because I guess it was a given, but I've also been playing a fuck ton of Diablo 4 because of course, like why would I not be doing that? So
yeah,
shout out to Necro mains, Necro best class. I will not take any criticism.
Necro is best.
But I suppose we probably ought to get to the game that we are here to discuss, which as we've mentioned, and as I'm sure you saw in the title, is Goof Troop for the Super Nintendo, and here family to give friendly. You a very involved and deep history of this game is Chris. So Chris, would you please enlighten the people about Goof Troop?
What do you do before you establish the game that will be the foundation of the survival horror genre? Design Disney games, apparently. No, there isn't much to say about our game du jour aside from the fact that Shinji Mikami of Resident Evil fame was one of the game's lead designers. Aside from that, if we must be blunt, and at the risk of disappointing many, there just isn't much out there other than this is just another solid Capcom Disney release. In terms of that release, the critics mostly liked it, but it wasn't received as anything special, really. Sales aren't exactly known, but the game is easily affordable on the secondhand market, so there's that. Today, the game is regarded as a fun game for the Super Nintendo and one of the console's underrated gems. But do we agree? We'll find out today, but as for the brief history itself, I guess we done goofed. And that is your brief history of Goof Troop for the SNES.
Wow. Thank you, Chris, for that insightful look into the fascinating history behind Goof Troop for the Super Nintendo.
Look, man. Look, I really couldn't find anything about this other than it was a Disney game. And I do feel really bad because this was a Patreon selected game. Like the patrons voted on it. They said, we want to hear you talk about Goof Troop. It was nominated by our excellent patron Studstill Smash. And this is what I could find. It's like, here's the game and we made it.
That's true. I guess we didn't mention that on the outset, but this is in fact the result of our quarterly patron polls. So
yes,
we're just like, yeah, I don't know. It's a game. So there you go. You guys getting your money's worth yet?
It's literally all I could find. I know. I blame the internet. And you know, it is interesting that you can't really find all that much without doing like some more extra digging on this. I'm sure like if I dug really deep and went, I don't even know if I could, to be honest with you, because this is just a licensed game. I hate to say just a licensed game, but this is a game that was regarded well generally throughout history. You'd think there'd be a little bit more development notes on it. And it just seems like, nah, man, we had a license to make a game based off this cartoon from on the Disney Channel. I think it was more on the Disney Channel. It was like on UPN or something. I don't know. Yeah, we made this game based off of it. And there you go. Like we just wanted, that's the long and the short. It's a licensed game. That's it.
Yeah, I mean, I even kind of took a little bit of time to try to do some internet sleuthing. After I saw the brief history, I was like, there has to be something. I went and looked. Yeah, there's nothing. There is not any useful information, any insight into the development of this game. It was just like, yeah, man, it's a fucking Capcom Disney game. There you go.
Yeah. It's not even, it's like, here's the weirdest thing about this is, you know how they had that Saturday morning collection for like the PS4, Xbox, and Switch or whatever, the Disney collection?
Yeah.
This game's not part of that. And again, this is a well-regarded game. And I think this is the only place it's ever been released was on the Super Nintendo. I don't think it's come out anywhere else.
Yeah, I don't think so.
This game has kind of been lost to history, and it's only really been passed down in terms of like oral history, like the ancients did. So it's really it's really interesting how this game, despite Capcom somewhat never acknowledging that this thing existed, despite having some like really good talent on its staff, is just mind blowing to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I found like the article on the cutting room floor, which is a pretty good site for a wiki style site for some, unknown things, cut content, what have you for games. And there's really just not even that much that's interesting. It's like the only thing, I mean, there's a couple things I'll throw in at the end in our miscellaneous. Yeah, there's just not a lot here. So I guess having said that, we should probably just kind of start, jumping into things. So, I mean, Chris, do you have any like personal experience with this game?
I guess I kind of have experience with it insofar as there was a cartoon that I occasionally watched back in the day.
Yeah. Okay. There you go.
I know there was a cartoon.
Yes.
I didn't even know the game came out, to be honest. I didn't know there was a game. I came to the acknowledgement that there was a game like a couple years ago. I mean, within the past decade, when people said, hey, this is a really good Super Nintendo game that everyone should check out. I was like, okay. And then I heard Shinji Mikami worked on it. I'm like, that's really interesting. And there are some, I guess, technically some elements here that do carry over into Resident Evil. If you really want to get technical, I don't think that was intentional or intended to be, but there is some things that you could say are there. But that's really it. Like, this is the first time that I've ever played this game or really know or really found out how it worked. I slight spoiler, I'm kind of glad I did. I'm happy I got to play this game. But other than that, yeah, no, this is my first time ever experiencing Goof Troop, the video game.
Yeah, well, and I guess this is one of those little miscellaneous tidbits, but since you kind of brought it up, I think it naturally fits here. But
yeah,
I mean, whatever he said, she said, kind of hard to nail down the exact truth of the matter. But from what I gathered, the room by room progression of this game, the way that it plays out, actually did sort of influence the very, very early builds of Resident Evil when Shinji Mikami worked on that. I think it was like 3 years later.
Yeah.
So there is that. There's a little bit of a connection there. But yeah, as far as my personal experience, I also did not know this game existed. I might have known about it maybe a little bit earlier than you, and only because I watched the Game Grumps playthrough of it on YouTube. So I knew it existed, and I saw kind of some of the frustration with some of the puzzle elements of the game. But yeah, that was really it. And I did watch some of the Goof Troop cartoon back in the day. It was not in my top favorites, I will say that. I think things like Darkwing Duck and Rescue Rangers and DuckTales probably were much more my jam than Goof Troop. Not that it was bad. I don't know. I just never really clicked with me in the same way that I guess those other ones did. But yeah, I had never played this, even though I had a Super Nintendo. I didn't even really know it was a thing. But I think somewhat similarly to you, I'm glad that our patrons did ultimately vote this in as an episode topic, because it was a reason for me to actually go and play this. And for the most part, I would agree with you that I think I'm glad that I did get the opportunity. So
yeah. And I guess that leads us right into the story of this game and the writing, which from what I understand, I forgot what they're doing, because every single time I tried to advance it would just skip over it. But apparently Pete and PJ, which are Goofy and Max. Max is Goofy's son, and PJ is Pete's son, and Pete is Goofy's neighbor / asshole neighbor / rival / best friend, or you know how Disney shit works.
Yeah, the relationship is complicated.
It's very complicated, but he doesn't get captured by pirates. He gets mistaken for the leader of the pirates, and
who is also called Pete, by the way.
Who is also Pete and looks exactly like Pete.
Keelhaul Pete.
Keelhaul Pete. Arr. They mistake him for Pete. They mistake Pete for Pete. The Adventures of Pete and Pete. Shout out if you get that reference. But yeah, and you're going to try and rescue them by going through the village where apparently everyone's been terrorized by Pirate Pete. And you get this in these very, I guess, inauthentic Caribbean accents. Maybe you want to. I guess.
I mean, insofar as like they are in text, right?
Yes.
I mean, it's not. Yeah, you can read into that as much as you want. I mean, they say them as like dem, like DEM and stuff like that. So there's that, I guess.
Hey, you be in the islands, man.
Yeah, exactly.
Like that. It's exactly like that.
And I mean, the whole like conceit of this anyway is sort of this like confluence of events, right? That you learn from the villagers and whatnot, that apparently Keelhaul Pete was eaten by a whale. So that's why that's why Pete, neighbor Pete, jerk ass neighbor Pete, that's why he is mistaken for Keelhaul Pete, because all the pirates assumed him to be dead. And so there's no chance of there being two Petes or whatever, at least on the outset of the game. And so that's why they're like, oh man, our captain has returned to us. And then hijinks ensue.
I'm still trying to figure out why there's a haunted mansion.
I have no idea.
It doesn't make sense.
They just ran out of things to do. I don't know.
Another Resident Evil connection, I suppose.
Yeah, there you go.
Yes, you go into the Resident Evil mansion in this game. So there,
you go to the Umbrella Mansion.
Yes, because that makes Goofy turn into a tyrant. That's and turns Jill into a sandwich. And that's why you don't. Yeah, it's delicious.
The master of unlocking.
I mean, there are keys.
That's true.
I guess that's a great segue into talking about the gameplay here.
I mean, yeah, because there's shit else for plot. So yeah, let's keep going. That's it. I mean, that's whatever. It's a Disney game. What else do you need?
You're out to save your neighbor.
Hijinks happen, and you are Goofy, and now you need to go save Pete. So there you go.
What more do you want us to say? Is it good? Is it bad? It's Disney. If you like Disney, it's there for you. It's a Goof Troop episode. It has, you know what?
Pretty much, yeah. Okay. Actually,
I jumped too quick to going into the gameplay here. I will say this: the writing in between. There's not a lot of plot here, but the writing in between levels and their little vignettes that they do, and mean, they're nothing special graphically, but the writing itself, I think, is actually pretty clever. And it did give me a little bit of a chuckle. It's not the worst. It could be a lot worse. They don't have to really put anything, but they at least tried. So I'll give it that. I'll give it that.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I didn't really think about this, and I don't know why, but you're absolutely right. Like this game could very well be just an episode of Goof Troop, like 100%.
So I guess now, now we're ready to go in the gameplay, because I think this will definitely be the meat of it, as it typically is. But it's a puzzle game first and foremost. That's what this game is. There are sections where that is debatable, but they are few and far between. And most of the time, you're just trying to figure out the best way to get to the end and fight a boss fight and move on to the next level to save your asshole neighbor, so to speak. And I'll let you start this one off, Shane. What did you think about this game's gameplay?
I liked it more than I thought I was going to. I will say that. Having seen the Game Grumps playthrough and clips of this game before, I didn't really think it was going to be my cup of tea. And truth be told, if we hadn't gotten this selected as a topic, I'm not sure that I ever would have played this game, just because I'm not usually big into very heavy puzzle style games like this. It's not that I dislike them or anything. It's just like, if I have the choice, I'd probably rather play something else. I probably would have just skipped over this and never played it. But, having gone in and actually put the time in, for the most part, I actually enjoyed it. It controls well enough. It's not like you really need to have, tight precision control in this style of game really at all. So you got a lot of leeway there. It's not a huge deal. It's very similar to like top down Zelda kind of in that way. And by and large, I found that the game is actually pretty forgiving. I admittedly, I obviously played this on an emulator because I don't have the Goof Troop Super Nintendo cartridge, but I didn't really have to use save states all that much at all. And even in the places that I did use them, it was more out of just me being lazy for the sake of convenience than out of real necessity. The game is lenient enough that you could pretty easily get through this whole thing without too much of a struggle. As far as like the encounters with enemy pirates and stuff are concerned, so the way that works, right, is not only do you pick up fruit like bananas and cherries and blah, blah, to gain hearts, which are your life totals, but after gaining, I think it's like 6 or 7 hearts, you gain an additional life. But not only that, but the game is even forgiving enough to make it so that if you have any hearts at all, so if you're not up to that total to gain a new life yet, if you take a hit from anything, you lose all the hearts you've accumulated rather than losing a life. So it's like an additional buffer, which is pretty nice. And then on top of that, it's very easy to build up lives, and you max out at 9, but that's like usually more than enough. So in that aspect, I felt that was really nice. I also actually really liked the fact that there weren't a ton of different usable items that you had to like sift through. Like, it is a very focused selection.
Yes.
I think like all told, it's like maybe half a dozen at most.
Well, you get the grappling hook,
right?
The bell.
You get a candle, shovel, the planks to create bridges,
and keys.
So yeah, like 6.
Yeah.
Now, if you're playing solo, you can only carry 2 items simultaneously, and you can swap between them with the shoulder button. If you're playing co-op, which for the record, this game is meant to be played co-op, and arguably the game is actually a little bit more difficult in some spots when you're playing solo because it is built to be played co-op.
Arguably.
Yeah, not that it's not doable, but anyway, I digress. But you can carry up to 2 of these items, and so there are some places where you'll need to make decisions on what you need to carry with you in order to solve the next puzzle. And sometimes that will necessitate backtracking to reacquire other items like keys and things like that in order to continue on. I think that's one of the gripes I have, and it's a fairly minor one, but this game does involve a pretty fair amount of backtracking and kind of having to remember like which room you needed to go to and what the path was to get there with the items that you need at any given time. So not the biggest fan of that, especially because unless I missed something, there isn't a map in this game, is there?
No.
Yeah, I didn't think so. So that's kind of a bummer. Again, this is another one of those games where I think it would have benefited from even having just a rudimentary map, so that like a Zelda dungeon style map would have been fine, right? Because it's set up the same way where you just go from one full screen room to the next. So if you had like just a map that was just a connection of blocks to show you the layout of the area you're in, I think that would have been like immensely helpful. But again, that's kind of nitpicky. But yeah, I got some other things, but I've been talking a lot, so I'm gonna let you go. So what are your thoughts on like the gameplay elements here?
So I really do like the basic gameplay elements. I think there's a lot here that it's not a straight puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
So when I say there's a lot here that I like, because it's not constantly just puzzle after puzzle after puzzle after puzzle. I think breaking it up with that action and being able to fight pirates like from time to time, I think when you do get that, it varies up the gameplay enough that it kept me involved. So like the first level is a really good level in introducing the player to the core concepts of what you're going to be doing. There are a couple other levels that I really enjoyed as well. Before I get more into that, I do want to say like the difficulty curve in this game is not something I really did like though, because level 1 is, as I already said, is fantastic level. It's a lot of fun. It really got me in there. Like the puzzles weren't overly difficult. Like the first time I played it, I got through it. I know you can get through that level in like 5 minutes, but it took me about 20 or so. But I did feel good when I got done with it. I'd be like, okay, if I went through this again, I could be able to figure out quicker and I'll do it. And then I got to level 2, and level 2 was infuriating. I almost just wanted to quit the game at that point because the things that the game wanted you to do, particularly at one spot, and that boss as well, was like, I don't know if I want to keep playing this because I don't feel like it's fair. And then as soon as I got to level 3, it's like, oh, this is a completely different game again. Like this is completely balanced and it's fair and I'm having a lot of fun here. So in terms of its difficulty, I think it just varies up too much. But getting the puzzles themselves, and you don't have like any sort of stupid timer, getting your items back and knowing what to do with them is fairly simple. Like a grappling hook will enable you to cross a chasm if there's a hook there. A candle will allow you to use light in a darkened area. So if you see a candle, you probably can infer that a darker area is coming up. You're going to need to use that candle. A shovel will allow you to get fruit so you can increase your life. So if you see a shovel, you can assume that there's going to be an area that you can do that. And of course, if you see a key, it means you're probably going to have to unlock a door, with the boss keys being, more detailed than the actual keys. So all these things, and they're placed perfectly where you need them.
Mm-hmm.
The areas that I have problems with is mostly in the fact that your action button, in order to kick tiles, which is the majority of the way that you'll be solving your puzzles here, is also attached to the button that raises your hand to either pick up an item or throw an item. So there will be times that I tried to kick a block, but instead of kicking the block, Goofy's or Max's hands went up. And some of these are very time critical, particularly starting in stage 4, when you have exploding blocks and you need to be, mindful of how long it takes for these blocks to explode. So when I was trying to kick these blocks sometimes, Goofy would put his hands up like he was trying to pick it up and it wouldn't do anything. The other is when you're fighting against pirates, and pirates can do things like kick blocks or pick up items and throw them at you. And they can do these in puzzle rooms. And if they happen to do this on blocks that you don't want them to, it can end up making that room unsolvable. So you have to figure out a way to get around them in real time. And sometimes that's not exactly feasible because the computer isn't always consistent on how it operates within certain rooms. So when it comes to attacking the pirates or the pirates themselves, that can be an annoyance because this game does not feel like it was built up from the ground up to have any real engagement with the enemies. It feels like it was more tacked on. It doesn't feel very organic. It feels like this game's focus was the puzzles because the combat is just straight up ass when I really sit down and think about it. But thankfully, the game is majority The game is a majority puzzle effort. So a lot of those frustrations that I did have were very limited and narrow in focus as opposed to what the majority of the game was, which made me forgive the game's shortcomings when it really came down to business.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. I think the one thing that, let me preface this by saying that I commiserate with you on the frustration around some of those rooms, especially in the latter portions of the game where the pirate enemies that have the ability to move blocks will totally screw up the room because they'll just kick that stuff out of pattern and then you're kind of screwed. But I do like the fact that the game, again, is pretty forgiving in that nothing is really permanent. Like you can just exit the room and come back and everything resets. So that was actually super helpful.
Yeah.
Knowing that that's always an option. And the fact that you could just pause the game at any time gives you enough time to really stop and study a room's puzzle to figure out what you need to do rather than, just kind of like scrambling around in real time being like, oh shit, I don't know what I need to do, which admittedly I did a couple of times because I forgot to just pause. But yeah, so there are definitely some frustrating parts of this game. And I do kind of agree that I feel like this game actually might have been better off if the enemies were just not even there in the first place, or if they were just like window dressing in some way, because they do kind of feel a little tacked on. And especially in a game that is so heavily focused on puzzle solving, it's almost like it's just an unnecessary distraction or detraction from what the game itself is presenting as like the core mechanics, which is a little bit of a weird disconnect there. I will say that. And also the boss encounters for the most part were like fine, but I almost feel like they were there because the developers were just like, oh, well, video games have levels and levels need bosses. Like I never felt in any of those boss encounters like I was really satisfied by the encounter at all. Like it was either laughably easy or just like annoying.
Yes.
So again, not necessarily terrible, but just one of those things where it almost felt like this was sort of like a formulaic by the books sort of decision of just like, oh, well, obviously we need bosses, so let's just do this. And that's not to say that there wasn't any creativity put into the boss encounters. I mean, each one is fairly unique in its own way. Each one does require some different, approach or mechanic. So there's definitely thought that was put into it, but I think by and large, they were a little superfluous. Like I would have been fine without them, just progressing through each level by solving puzzles. I think the enemies don't really introduce much other than just frustration, especially those jerk ass bees. Those bees can just fuck right off because those are probably the most annoying enemies in this game.
Was that level 2? I just think level 2 is a horrendous level.
Yeah, it
overall.
was. Yeah, I think it was level 2. I think that might be the only place they show up too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just the random nature of like their flight pattern. And then the fact that they just dive bomb you. And especially if you're playing as Goofy, because Goofy is slower
yes,
than Max, but does more damage, which in my opinion, overall, I think is the better choice if you're playing solo, with the exception of the bees, probably, because I think Max could probably dodge them a little bit easier. So what I'm saying is fuck those bees. But, other than that, I don't know. I guess maybe I kind of wish that it focused more on really what like the core gameplay loop here is, which is the puzzle solving, and just remove a lot of the like unnecessary combat stuff.
Yeah. And the game's really short.
It is. Yeah.
It's only 5 levels, and those 5 levels you could easily get done. Each one could be 5 to 10 minutes each. So you're talking anywhere. Once you get really good at it, of course, when you're figuring it out, they'll take anywhere from about 20 to 45 minutes, depending on how good you are, like 45 on the really bad end of it.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's going to take you quite a bit of time to do it, like some replays in order to figure out just the level in and of itself out. So it might take you a few days before you really nail down how good or how much you need to get good at this level. But when it comes down to like I would have preferred the game have been longer, but with no enemies. Like, put more puzzles in. If you just completely remove it and maybe just have boss fights, but make boss fights more puzzle oriented than combat oriented, because all of them are for the most part combat oriented. And you're right. They're either too easy or annoying. Like boss 1, easy. Boss 2, I was annoying.
Mhm.
Like I struggled a lot with the second boss. Boss 3 was interesting. I think they had the 2 skeleton monsters, you know, they had different patterns in the way they attacked you, and when, you know, their attacks landed, which was the ammunition you use against them. I really liked the level 3 boss. In fact, level 3 is fantastic top to bottom, if I haven't said that already. The Haunted Mansion is probably the best level, which is ironic, but it's a great one.
Yeah.
And then level 4 it's long. It feels long. I'll say that. It feels long. It's not particularly hard, but it's just, again, it has these annoying combat sections with the pirates that you'd rather not deal with. I think that's the one where you have the repeating rooms, where you have those enemies that are throwing barrels at you that you can't get to, that are all over the room, or you just run through the middle with all these enemies that you technically can avoid. You don't necessarily even need them there. And then the boss there is extraordinarily easy too. You can just hide in a corner and wait for them to come out and attack it. There's a lot of fluff in a game that doesn't really need it. And I think if they just focused on those puzzles, it would be a better game for it.
Yeah.
At the same point, I want to know what you think about this. Like, you're right. It is forgiving, but if you die, you can get into a death spiral really quick. And yes, you have limited continues, but if you go back to the password, because as a password save, you can just restart the level again with 2 lives, which is the same as the continue. So you do have that.
Mm-hmm.
But it can lead, like, you can die, and if you're not entirely prepared, like like a death can become 2 deaths or 3 deaths or 4 deaths, and it can happen really quick. Did you experience any of that?
I did, actually. I think I won't actually. No, I take that back. I was about to say the only time I had that was in a boss battle, but actually that's not true. There was one room in particular that was basically just a gauntlet of enemies throwing barrels and shit at you, that I think the best solution, like you said, was really just to kind of haul ass through there and just survive. I think my first couple of takes on trying to get through that room, it spirals out of control pretty quickly. Like, things will be going along at a pretty decent pace, and you know, you're stacking up to your max 9 lives, and you're like, all right, I'm doing pretty good. And then you'll hit a room like that, and then you just get nailed, like one after another, and suddenly you have like 2 lives left out, and then you're like, what the hell just happened? So the difficulty in that way is pretty spiky. That's definitely not super great. But I think I only encountered that, like, I want to say maybe twice. It was like that one room, and then there was a boss fight where I had that happen. But I want to say I think that was also because I just didn't realize that you could catch the bombs by just having your arms in the air. So
yeah,
once you told me about that, I was just like, oh, this is way easier now.
Yeah, that was a mechanic I didn't know for a little while, and I was very upset when I realized that was something that you could do. In fact, it's not something that you can do. It's something that you pretty much have to do.
Mm-hmm.
Is if you don't know that you can catch things with your arms up in order to grab things to throw them at enemies, you're probably not going to make it through this game. If you don't have a manual, like I don't, and you just kind of have to figure things out on your own, it's not exactly intuitive that's what you're supposed to do. So again, this is a game that does require a little bit of pre-knowledge going into it, which is fine. I can't fault the game for it because it did come with a manual that did tell you what you were supposed to do. It's really not the game's fault. It's more my fault. But it is something like if you're just picking it up and you're plugging in, you don't have any foresight into what this game is trying to do, that can be a little problematic because everything else in this game, except for that, is extremely intuitive. Everything makes sense if you've played a game before. Like, oh, here's some bricks. Here, there's a spot that this brick needs to go in. I guess, oh, I can kick the brick. And okay, so now I have to know how to kick the brick in order for all these bricks to go into the brick spots. And all makes sense. There's a missing part in this bridge over here. Oh, this item looks like a bridge. Maybe if I use this item over here, oh, I can't get across. Oh, there's hooks here and I have a grappling hook. Okay. So like everything makes sense for the most part, except when they're firing bombs at you or barrels at you, and you need to catch them to throw them back. Now, once you know that, yeah, no big deal. But up until that point, that's, I think, the only really non-intuitive part of this game. But that's a big part of the game to not know. And I think it's entirely worth mentioning, as we have, as kind of a detractor from the experience overall.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Once you get that down, though, I will say it is pretty satisfying once you start coming across those enemies that not only throw the barrels at you, but can catch the ones that you throw at them. It's a pretty satisfying little game of tennis. Like if you throw a barrel, they catch it and then toss it back at you, and you just immediately intercept and then throw it and knock them out. That's pretty fun. But yeah, man, I mean, I feel like we covered a lot as far as the gameplay of this is concerned. So unless there was anything else that you wanted to touch on specifically, for me, I think just kind of capping things off, like I said at the beginning, I ended up enjoying this more than I thought I would. And for the most part, the gameplay is actually pretty enjoyable. And I do appreciate the relative brevity of the game. My playthrough, going in basically blind, having never played it before, I finished it just shy of like 3 hours. And that's not a lot. This is because it's a puzzle game, especially. Once you've kind of got those down and you know what you're doing, if you were to go back and replay this, which, truth be told, I could totally see this as one of those like comfort games for someone as a kid. Like once you kind of got used to it and you knew the puzzles and everything, like I could definitely see somebody just like popping this in the SNES and just to sit down for an hour and a half, hour or two or whatever, just to have a fun time. So once you are accustomed to the solutions to the puzzles, you could probably be very easily breeze through this in like probably like an hour or so.
Oh, easily. At least, I mean, definitely under 2.
Yeah.
If you get really good under an hour, I could definitely see that. Absolutely. I guess the only thing I would add is that the final boss is a bit of a pain in the ass. Keelhauled Peter.
Yeah.
I mean, he's no pushover. That's for damn sure, especially if you're goofy. You need some speed on that boss. But yeah, I think that's the only thing I would add. It's a satisfying final boss fight for what it's worth. No real complaints. I mean, a final boss is supposed to be hard, right?
I mean, you would think, yeah. You
would think, especially in a game as short as this. So, I mean, that's like, what am I complaining about here? I'm just complaining about I was annoyed at times, but in a 3-hour game, that's fair. That's to be understood. I can't bitch too much. And I'll leave it at that.
Well, there you go.
But let's talk about the graphics here. They're good. I don't know why I said there. They're good. They look fine. I don't think it could look better for a Super Nintendo game with Goof Troop. Goofy looks like Goofy. The enemies look like, I don't know, pirate enemies. I guess the sprites technically could have been bigger, but they don't necessarily have to be. I mean, yes, there's room for improvement here. This is a 1993 game, so I don't know what the best looking game of 1993 was at the time, but this is definitely comparable. I mean, the game after this that was made by the same team was Aladdin. I do think Aladdin looks better on the Super Nintendo than this does, but I mean, that's to be expected. It's later than this one, but no issues. I don't think I experienced anything like any slowdown or cut frames or anything like that. Graphically, yeah, it's a very pleasing game. You know what everything looks like? It's bright, it's colorful, it's smooth, and that's all you can really ask for, right? It's fine.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of feel like it's a little bit of a cop out, but honestly, I don't really have too much to add to it. It's fine. Like, I don't know what else to say about it. It's not anything that's going to like blow your mind. Right. And you're 100% correct that Aladdin visually is definitely markedly better than this game. But again, it came out after. But yeah, no, I think it does a good job at what it's trying to accomplish. You know, like all of the recognizable characters are represented appropriately. Everybody looks the way that they should. I think the sprite work is competent enough. I do like the little cutscene, transitions that they have. Not necessarily the best quality pixel art in the cutscenes. I will say that it's not terrible by any means, but it's not like fantastic, but it's serviceable. But yeah, I mean, I don't know, man. There's not too much else to say about it. Like, I think it was done well.
It feels like you had like the most talented artist and you gave them a really short deadline is what it kind of feels like.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, it could have been better, but it still looks really good. But you can identify areas like, you're right. The cutscenes, I feel like I've seen better cutscenes on the NES, specifically from Sunsoft games. Shout out to Gremlins too. Go check out that episode.
Yeah.
If I'm complaining about a cutscene in a kid's cartoon show video game, like I'm really trying to find something to criticize. The fact of the matter is that, like you said, Shane, nothing here is going to blow you away. It's not an outstanding title, but it does everything it needs to do in the sense that it is a bright and colorful game. So it's aged well. You can go back to this and you can enjoy it. It looks a lot better than many RPGs that were top down from that time period. There is that from that certain like view and perspective for a top down type of game. It looks really good. But no, like if you're talking about best graphical presentations on the Super Nintendo, this is not something that you're going to be talking about the slightest.
No, not really. A couple of additional things before we move on that I guess I should highlight. I do like, and I didn't play as Max, so I didn't necessarily see that, but I did like the walk cycle animations for Goofy, that they were appropriately gangly. The animation, I think you mentioned, like that by and large is all really smooth. I also didn't encounter like any slowdown or any weird glitchiness or anything like that. So I think everything was very competently put together. I think there's one small nitpick that I have, and it is very small, but the text boxes that come up when you talk to NPCs in the game.
Yeah, they kind of suck.
I really don't like the fact that they are translucent. Like there's no background at all. So it's just white text on whatever the current game screen is. And sometimes that can be difficult to read. Again, super minor thing, but like also games have been doing text boxes for fucking decades. So I just feel like putting a solid color background so it's easier to read, it was not a huge ask. So I'm not really sure of the design decision behind that one. But like I said, it's just kind of a nitpick.
I agree with you. I have nothing more to add on that point. Agree. I guess we should move over into the audio design.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Are you just tossing this over to me because you don't know what to say about it?
No, because I started the last one. I think it's good to have you start out the music and sound section of this, Shane. I'm trying to be a generous, goofy inseminator.
Wow. Great. Thank you. You're a generous lover, if for nothing else.
Gosh.
Yeah. I mean, okay. So by and large, I think I liked it. I actually think I know I made this comment when I was playing this on stream recently. And that is, if there is one gripe that I have, is that I felt like the loop, the music loop is a little too short. It's more or less noticeable depending on what level you're on. I think the first level, I didn't really even notice at all because the music is pretty enjoyable. It's just this like calypso beachy kind of theme. Even though it was maybe a relatively short loop, it wasn't anything that like stood out as like, oh, this thing is looping every whatever 20, 30 seconds or what have you. But it does get way more noticeable at some of the other levels. I actually want to say, for as much as I like the haunted castle or haunted mansion level, I think that was the one where I might have pointed that out because the nature of the song in that level, it's very noticeable when it loops. It kind of gets grating after a while when you're like sitting there trying to solve a puzzle. Granted, the music stops when you pause, so that's nice. Another reason to pause if you're sitting there just studying a puzzle. But yeah, no, I think all in all, I liked the sound design. I think everything was appropriate for the levels that they were in. I think the sound effects were also pretty good. There wasn't anything that I can think of that stood out as like particularly bad, but also not necessarily anything that was particularly good either. I think this falls under the same category as the graphics in that I think it was very solidly middle of the road.
Serviceable.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say the sound is serviceable too. It is a soundtrack that you can tune out. Not to say that it's bad, because you can listen to it. If you listen to the music's fine. There's nothing wrong with it at all. It's not grating, but you're right. That loop, especially if you're getting frustrated at a puzzle and you forget to pause it. And it's just like this music again, this music again, this music again. Okay. Stage 4 is when it really got irritating for me, just because stage 4 is a little bit longer of a stage as well, compared to the previous 3. That's when the stages, if you don't know what you're doing, they definitely elongate by quite a bit, the bigger areas and so on and so forth.
Yeah, actually, you know what? I'm going to jump in right here and say that I just went back and looked real quick while you're talking, and it's not the Haunted Mansion. It actually is level 4. It's the cave.
Yeah.
That cave music, like it's appropriately cavey. Like it actually sounds very, very similar to the music in the cavern in Aladdin, which is probably not surprising because also Capcom.
Right.
But yeah, that short loop for that, like kind of like droning background, like dun, 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 with like the twinkly noises over the top. That shit gets grating if you're sitting there for too long.
Oh, absolutely. Especially when you're getting frustrated if you can't figure out exactly what you're supposed to be doing in a puzzle sense.
Yeah.
You got to need catchy music when you do that. Even the catchiest of music, people are going to get irritated when you're just trying to figure out where to put stuff if it's not really quick. You could put Bubble Bobble's theme track there and I would want to kill somebody. Other than that, yeah, I mean, I'd say like some sounds need to be there more. Like you referenced the bee. I don't think you hear the bee when it's flying around. If they had a little bit of a buzzing sound, that would have been appreciated. Or just enemy sounds in general. I think they made the frogs make some sounds, but the snakes didn't make any sounds when they're moving around. So like lack of audio cues for some enemies or most enemies is like looking back at it afterwards. It's something I'm thinking about. Not so much when I was playing it, but definitely something I can critique away from it, looking back at it, which could have been improved. But like I just said, if I wasn't really thinking about it while I was playing, is it really a detractor? Not so much. The music more so being that. Other than that, it has like cute cartoony sounds. With you knock an enemy out, it makes up, really quick, just cartoony sound, as you would expect from a video game based off a cartoon. So criticism is minor. You're not going to be humming any of the tunes from this game, I don't think. It's not something that's going to get caught in your head. In fact, as we said, it might annoy you, but at the same time, it's not going to annoy you to the point that you're going to turn your volume all the way down. I think mentally, most people are just going to be able to tune out the noise, generally speaking, because this is a game that requires a little bit of brain power. And I find myself, when I'm thinking about what I'm supposed to be doing, even if it's not like severely mind crippling problems, I don't tend to focus on the music itself so I can get through it. So overall sound it exists and it's not offensive. So good job, Goof Troop.
It's actually interesting you bring that up because it's something I didn't even notice in my playthrough, but now going back and just quickly looking at like a long play on YouTube, you're 100% right that like none of the enemies have any sound, like at all.
Yeah.
The frogs that you mentioned, so they do, in that they make that little water like bloop noise when they pop out of the water, but by the time you hear that, they're already on the ground. So it's not like you could use that as an indicator to like avoid them.
Right.
But other than that, no, that enemies have like no sound design at all, which I guess is not a big deal in the end because I didn't notice it until you pointed it out. But it is interesting that you mentioned that because like I totally glossed over that when I was playing.
Yeah. I think when you mentioned the bee, it made me think like, did it buzz? No, it didn't.
Yeah.
Huh. That's weird. All right, Shane. So before we get into our Patreon pontifications, I understand you have one miscellaneous fact you would like to show during the course of your research. So what do you got?
I do. Yeah. So again, this is not something that, as far as I'm aware, has ever been officially confirmed or denied, but the connection seems pretty apparent. So a lot of people have pointed out that it would appear that this game takes a lot of inspiration from an earlier Capcom effort, which was Pirate Ship Higemaru, which was an arcade puzzle game released in Japan in 1984. If you go and look that up, now that we're talking about it, take a look at some screenshots and you'll see that it is, in fact, a top-down sort of Zelda-esque style puzzle-oriented game set on a pirate ship that involves barrels and fighting off pirate enemies, and there's a lot of similarities there. So a lot of people have made that connection that perhaps there was some inspiration taken from their previous work with pirate ship Higemaru. So just an interesting little fact there.
I'm going to have to look that up. I've never even heard of that game.
Yeah. Apparently it was, like I said, it was Japan only arcade. And then there was a mobile phone port of it released in Japan in like 2006. But as far as I'm aware, I don't know if it's been made available stateside. Possibly.
It can through the wonders of emulation, though.
That is true. Yeah, it was included in some compilations like the Capcom Classics collection for PS2 and Xbox. But again, I'm not sure if that's in the North American versions or not.
Well, are you ready to get into the Patreon pontification, Shane?
You know what? I am. I like that we're including this new section.
I enjoy it as well. And if you would like to have your thoughts about our game of the day included in these episodes, what you can do is you can head over to our Patreon at linktree/retrohangover, which is linktr.ee/retrohangover, and then join our Discord. And if you submit a comment for whatever game we might be covering next, which you also get exclusive information on what that game might be based off that information, based off, just that, then your comment will be read here on the show. So Shane, how about you kick this one off?
Sure. Yeah. So we start off our pontifications with the one and only quizmaster, the MaskedKeaton. And he says that he rented it and beat it, and he's pretty sure that he enjoyed it. And he says, I ponder picking it up when I see it at retro stores, which would imply that perhaps he has not done that yet. I don't know if this episode is going to sway you, Keaton, or not, but there you go.
All right. Our next comment is from Keith Gasper from the Main Quest podcast. He says he's never played it, but who knew Squaresoft would take over and make the weird sequel in 2002? Thank you, Keith. Eric is going to be right on that, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah, for sure. All right. And we are rounding out our pontifications this time with a little bit of a longer one. But given that we only have a few, we'll allow it this time. But Studstill Smash the Milkman says, it may just be the rose-colored glasses of nostalgia, but Goof Troop is a top-tier SNES game for me. I have so many memories of playing with my dad growing up, and every summer when two of my cousins would come, stay a few weeks, we would always play through the game at least 2 or 3 times. The puzzles probably aren't that tough or in-depth, but for an 8-year-old, they could give me pause sometimes. Yeah, they were definitely not tough or anything. It's just totally cool. No. I'm an adult.
No.
Anyway, just looking at a screenshot brings the music into my mind and takes me back to those elementary school summers. Like I said, it may just be the nostalgia, but this is one of those SNES games that instantly takes me back in time to younger and more innocent days.
Thank you, Studstill Smash. Studstill is the person who nominated this game for today. He nominated it at the tier he is eligible to do so, and our patrons elected it. So thank you for nominating this game, because, we're about to talk about whether or not we enjoyed it. So I guess that does bring us to our final section as we wrap this up. Does this game hold up today? Do you want me to take this first, Shade, or you got this?
Yeah, you know what? Why don't you go ahead? You start us off.
Okay. So I'm going to go off with, this game holds up today. It definitely does. I think that the mechanics here, are they all perfect? No, they're not. But this is a game that I think I could just sit down. I can have a good time with. It's not too difficult. It's not long. If there's any struggle with it whatsoever, I can just put it down and come back to it later. And because of the password save, you can just master each level one at a time. And before you know it, you're probably beating this game in less than an hour. And with the quality and the polish that you are getting for a Super Nintendo title, you really can't ask for much more. It's Capcom quality through and through. No, it's not their best efforts. No, I don't really think it's one of the best games of all time. But then again, I didn't have someone to play it with in a co-op setting. So co-op might be the way to do this. And it might be a ton of fun. It looks like a ton of fun. And with each character having different qualities in terms of Goofy being slower but more powerful, and Max being faster and able to navigate around the screen in order to avoid and solve puzzles quicker. Yeah, you could probably have a lot of fun with a friend, with a cousin, with your father, as Studstill Smash did, or mother, whatever the case might be. Yeah, this is a game that definitely does hold up. No control issues, still looks good, still sounds decent, flows very well. Goof Troop is a recommendation in my book. How about you, Shane?
Yeah, I think overall I would say yes. I think it still holds up today. I don't think there's really anything that would detract from somebody playing this today. You know, there are a lot of games that we've covered where it's just like, this was good at the time, but you know, some of these mechanics just do not hold up, or there have been a lot of quality of life improvements since this game came out that just make this, you know, real rough to go back to, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't really see any of that here. I think partially because it is just really straightforward in what it's doing. Like, it's not trying to do anything weird or esoteric. It's just, this is a puzzle game with some light combat. And given that it is a 16-bit pixel based 2D game, it also holds up in that fashion really well. So the only thing I could think of that might be a detractor is just not knowing, like we said, some of the less obvious mechanics, just because arguably someone coming to this today might not have the instruction manual available. But also, like, instruction manuals are available online now. Like, there's a PDF scan of just about every manual ever on the internet for you to just go find. So it's not like it's that difficult to track down necessarily. And even then, that's not enough for me to say, like, nah, it doesn't hold up. Like, it's a fun little game. It doesn't ask a lot of you in terms of time. I will say that some of the puzzles later on do take a little bit of brain power to get through, but once you solve them, I could easily see this being a game that someone would just like come back to and pop in every now and again just to blow off some steam or just have a good time for an hour or two. So yeah, I don't see why not. I think someone could definitely go back to this game today, right now, and still have an enjoyable experience.
There it is. The Goof Troop holds up. Both of our opinions. Doesn't really do anything wrong. So yeah, go check it out. Emulate it. Play it any way you can. It's not that expensive as a game itself. I think it's like $20 if you want to get a physical copy, if you have the means to play that. But otherwise, yeah, just go find it. Capcom hasn't made it available, so they're not just resting and taking your money. So there that is. I think this is about time where we wrap up this show and tell everyone all the other places that we can find us.
Where can we find us? Well,
yes,
Chris already mentioned it, but we do have that old link tree, so that's the place to go. So if you want to find more Retro Hangover and you didn't know already, then that's where you need to be. So head over to linktree/Retro Hangover and you'll find all of our stuff there. That the show feed itself, if you, I don't know, are listening to this somehow in a weird parallel universe and you need to create a weird time loop to where you need to find the show in order to find the show. I don't know, man. Time is weird and wibbly wobbly, but you can do that. You can also find our Patreon and the merch store should you wish to support the show in that fashion. And you can also find our socials with those little icons down along the bottom of the link tree, as well as our Twitch streams, where I did in fact play this game.
You did?
More or less start to finish. I didn't play the last level, but that was just for the sake of time. But you could have seen me play through this live before we even talked about it. So if you want to get in on that kind of action, Chris is going to tell you how you can do that.
Yeah, so if you head over to twitch.tv/Retro Hangover, you too can join in on the action and watch us play video games with our fantastic community who keep our comment section fresh. And we do this at 9 p.m. Eastern time, US. And typically, as I have been saying, Shane usually does the spoops unless he is playing a game like Goof Troop. And I am usually just angry and annoying. But if you want to see me get angry and annoying and Shane gets spooked, just head over to twitch.tv/Retro Hangover. And we hope to see you there at 9 p.m. Eastern time on Sundays.
All right. Well, I suppose all of that being said, until next time,
play with your mad, wet, squirty, goofy dildo joystick.
Yuck. Shane here with a quick message. You know, the one rule Chris and I have always gone by regarding advertisements is this. It has to be something we use and can personally vouch for. If you know me, you know I love coffee, and Bones Coffee Company has been my go-to for home brewing for quite some time now. Their small batch beans come in an impressive variety of flavors like Mint Invaders from Chocolate Space, or Electric Unicorn, which I swear tastes exactly like Fruity Pebbles. And the best part? No added sugar or calories involved, just natural flavors infused right into the beans themselves. Build your own sample pack of 5 4-ounce bags to find out which flavors speak to you, or jump in head first with full 12-ounce bags. They've even got K-Cups. Step up your homebrew game with Bones Coffee by visiting bit.ly/RHPBones. That's bit.ly/RHPBONES.